It began with a moment so small that most people would later struggle to remember the exact second it happened, yet so cruel that it carved itself into everyone's conscience who witnessed it. A bright afternoon at Santa Monica Pier, laughter in the air, tourists snapping photos, the ocean rolling in like it always does. And right there, in the middle of that normal, happy noise, a disabled girl became a target. Not because she provoked anyone. Not because she was in the way. But simply because she was vulnerable. Words came first, sharp, demeaning, meant to strip her of dignity, and then the kicks followed, each one louder than the last in its cruelty. What made it worse wasn't just the act itself, but how ordinary the setting was, how public the humiliation became. This wasn't happening in the shadows, it was happening in the open, under the sun, where kindness should have been easy. In that instant, the pier stopped being a place of joy and turned into a mirror, reflecting a harsh truth about how quickly humanity can fail when empathy is replaced with mockery, and power is mistaken for the right to harm. And what followed was just as painful to witness as the cruelty itself. People stood there, close enough to hear every word, close enough to see every movement, yet somehow far enough away to convince themselves it wasn't their responsibility. Some looked down at their phones, pretending not to notice. Others took a step back, as if distance could erase what was happening right in front of them. It wasn't that they were heartless, many were simply afraid, unsure, waiting for someone else to move first. But silence has weight, and in moments like this, it presses down on the victim harder than any insult. Every second without intervention sent the same unspoken message: you are alone. The crowd became a lesson in how injustice survives, not just through the actions of those who harm, but through the hesitation of those who witness it. We like to believe we would step in, that we would say something, do something, but when the moment arrives, comfort often wins over courage. And that uncomfortable truth forces us to ask ourselves, not what we would do in theory, but what we actually do when someone needs us to speak before the silence does. Then, just when it felt like the silence might win, something changed in the air. At first, it was barely noticeable, a low rumble cutting through the sound of waves and chatter. Heads began to turn. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The noise grew louder, closer, until it could no longer be ignored. Motorcycles. One by one, then dozens, then what felt like an endless line rolling toward the pier. No announcement, no dramatic warning, just presence. And somehow, that was enough. The bullies who had felt so powerful moments earlier suddenly looked uncertain, their confidence shrinking with every passing second. Strangers dismounted, forming a quiet circle, not shouting, not throwing threats, just standing there with a shared understanding that this would go no further. Fear shifted direction. The energy changed. What had been chaos became control, and what had been cruelty met an unmovable line. For the first time since it began, the girl was no longer alone. In that moment, it wasn't about bikes or leather or size, it was about people who chose to show up when others stepped back, proving that sometimes hope doesn't arrive softly, sometimes it announces itself with a roar that says, enough is enough. What stood out most in that moment wasn't intimidation, it was restraint. These were people who easily could have escalated the situation, yet they didn't. They didn't shout insults back or throw a single punch. They simply stood between harm and the person being harmed. And that's when the definition of strength quietly changed. Real power isn't about how much fear you can cause, it's about how much harm you can prevent. The bikers didn't need to prove anything, they already had. By choosing calm over chaos, they showed that protection speaks louder than aggression ever could. Their presence said, without a single word, that cruelty had limits here. That dignity mattered. That no one gets to pick on the vulnerable and walk away untouched by consequence. For the girl, it wasn't just about safety in that instant, it was about being seen as someone worth defending. And for everyone watching, it rewired something deep inside, because we witnessed strength used not to dominate, but to shield. That's the kind of strength that doesn't leave bruises, it leaves examples. And once you see it, you realize that true power has never been about hurting others, but about standing firm so others don't have to face harm alone. The shift was almost instant, like watching a tide turn right in front of you. Moments earlier, the bullies controlled the space with laughter and cruelty, feeding off the silence around them. But now, that control evaporated. They weren't the loudest voices anymore. They weren't the center of attention. Surrounded by people who stood united, they shrank into the reality of what they had done. Meanwhile, something just as powerful happened on the other side of that circle. The girl, who had been pushed into invisibility, slowly reclaimed her place in the world. She wasn't being stared at with pity, she was being protected with purpose. You could feel it ripple through the crowd, a collective realization that when people stand together, power changes hands quickly. No speeches were made, no dramatic confrontations unfolded, yet the message landed harder than any shout ever could. Cruelty thrives when it thinks no one will challenge it, but unity exposes it for what it really is, weak. In just a few minutes, the pier became more than a public space, it became a lesson. A reminder that dignity can be restored, fear can be reversed, and justice doesn't always need permission, it just needs people willing to stand shoulder to shoulder and refuse to let wrong be normal. And that's where the story stops being about that pier, those bikers, or even that single moment. Because what happened there confronts every one of us with a choice we face more often than we like to admit. Not always in scenes that dramatic, not always with engines roaring in the distance, but in everyday moments where someone is mocked, excluded, or quietly harmed. We all like to believe we'd be brave, that we'd step in without hesitation, but courage usually doesn't announce itself, it waits to be chosen. The crowd that day learned something powerful: doing nothing is still doing something. Silence shapes outcomes. Hesitation decides who feels protected and who feels abandoned. And yet, the opposite is just as true. One step forward can break a chain of cruelty. One voice can shift a room. One act of solidarity can remind someone they matter. You don't need to be the strongest person there, the loudest, or the most feared. You just need to decide that indifference is no longer an option. Because in the end, history doesn't remember who watched, it remembers who stood up when it mattered most.